Mother of Congress. Okay. Okay. Is this happening yet? All right, there we go. Oops, it might have caught me saying the last thing I said. Should be bad. Okay, hey Megan, I can see you here. Can you hear me? Can you comment that you can? I've been having some technical difficulties. Sort of frustrating, but I think it might be working. I apologize if anyone heard me say a swear word. I can see myself talking, but I definitely cannot tell if you can hear me. Yes, Victoria. Okay. Did you guys hear me say, did you hear me swear? Just being real. Hey, Ken. All right. Okay, good. Thanks, Garrett. I don't know what was happening. I was trying to do it straight from Facebook and not go through this interface, but that didn't work at all. So, but I can actually see your comments, which I normally can't. So that's kind of exciting. Facebook changed something. All right, so we're going to be talking about Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court and what will happen as a result of that. But let's I see that there's 13 people here, so if you're here, please say hello. I'd love to see who's part of this conversation, and it would be great if you would share this on your own Facebook and invite your friends to come join the conversation as well as we're getting started. For those of you, everybody who I can see, I know, but my name is Caitlin Sposi-Belknap. I moved to a Men's National Director, and I'll be kind of leading this conversation on the Move to Amend end. Hi, Cheryl. Nice to meet you. And I see that more folks are joining, so thanks for joining. Feel free to say hello when you get here. Let me know where you're tuning in from. If you're already active with Move to Amend and part of an affiliate, let us know. If not, tell us if you're new. So welcome. So yeah, we wanted to, this is definitely not the only time we will talk about this and the only conversation that needs to be had, but we wanted to start it off this way with an opportunity for some interaction. And we are definitely in a bit of a mess when it comes to the Supreme Court, but we have some ideas about how we can capitalize on this. Also, some of what is possible will depend on what happens with the election, right? And who is in Congress, because any efforts to hold the Supreme Court accountable and or adjust the Constitution to make clear what human rights need to be protected by the Constitution is all kind of related to largely who's in Congress and what kind of political will there is in Congress, to some extent with the states as well, potentially. We're talking about constitutional amendments. So we see this as, there's no quick fix. We are very far up that shit creek, and that's the reality. And it's not because Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court or Gorsuch is on the Supreme Court, right? We've been headed up that creek for a long time now. But it was kind of significant that we had this moment where the majority of the country made clear that they were opposed to Kavanaugh being nominated or selected for the Supreme Court, and yet that's still what happened, right? So I see there's more folks here. If you're joining, please say hello in the comments and let us know you're here, and introduce yourself if you'd like. My name is Caitlin Sposi-Belknap. I moved to a Men's National Director. So first of all, I want to talk about what some of the options are in terms of holding the court accountable that we should just be aware of, that are out there, that are not new. So first of all, it is possible to impeach a Supreme Court justice. And the House of Representatives is who takes the lead on that. that's part of what I mean about depending on what happens in November. I just want to be really clear, though, that one, Move to Amend is nonpartisan. So I'm not going to be here to, wax on about all the benefits of one party versus another. And two, we have a very strong critique of both parties. And I think the Kavanaugh nomination and then appointment to the Supreme Court really showed us where we're at with both parties. And that is a whole lot of our problem, right? So it is true that there were some Democrats in the Senate that, certainly made some strong statements and seemed as though they were trying to help protect against the Kavanaugh appointment. I don't know that we could honestly say that they gave it their all. I mean, we did see that what the Republican Party is willing to do in order to avoid appointing somebody that they don't want to the Supreme Court, right? Previously, when they refused to appoint Garland, Obama's nominee, for the spot that Gorsuch ultimately took. And so not that the dirty politics that the Republicans are employing these days is what we're advocating for, but certainly, I mean, from my perspective, we're basically in a situation where we are in a class war. We have very limited amount of time left before climate change and species extinction completely changes the face of our reality and calls into question whether human beings, as we understand ourselves, can continue on as a species productively on this planet. So the stakes are high. And in that context, I want people in Congress who are willing to do whatever it takes to protect humanity and democracy. And right now, we have neither political parties with that commitment, right? So we might have some strong individuals within, I would say, the Democratic Party for the most part. But in terms of as a party, there certainly was not a lot of political will. And just as a little aside, I think it's telling that the Democrats in the Senate repeatedly keep kind of rubber stamping Trump's nominees to federal court positions other than the Supreme Court without even raising questions. Some really awful people all across the board are being appointed to the Supreme Court right now, and the Democrats are really showing no leadership in stopping that, right? And it did not feel as though they did everything in their power to stop Kavanaugh. And part of, I think, the misstep was putting all of the eggs in the basket of the sexual assault and rape allegations. I mean, I feel like there's no question that he did those things and probably more. And that's egregious and certainly is grounds enough to say that somebody should not be on the Supreme Court. However, we know that Republicans are, for them, a lot of this comes down to abortion, plain and simple. And if you are of the perspective that abortion is murdering children, then it almost, I mean, I'm not saying Lindsey Graham or the Republicans in the Senate, but in terms of regular everyday Republicans, they're sort of saying, well, when we weigh killing babies or raping women, we're going to decide on killing babies. Now, that is nothing to do with what I think is, real or how we should go about this. But in that context, there was so much more that could have also been said about Kavanaugh that was barely mentioned by the Democrats. I mean, on issues that most Americans support. And so in terms of, drumming up more of an argument against him, more popular will against him, putting it all on the rape allegations, I think was a strategic mistake. And I can't imagine that Democrats are not smart enough to realize that that is, where the chips would fall. And so, I hold them responsible for the fact that they didn't point out those other issues more around net neutrality, around what's going to happen with healthcare, around what's going to happen with gay marriage, probably. Again, like these are issues that most Americans support, and that's part of why they were opposed to Kavanaugh. But that wasn't really the conversation, hardly. Not to mention the perjury, right? I mean, that all those things in and of themselves. So we need to, part of what we need to grapple with is, regardless of what happens in November, even if the Democrats take the House and pick up some significant Senate seats, the reality is the leadership in that party has shown itself over the last many, many years, that it's shown us that it is not really their agenda to do whatever it takes to fight for us. So that's a reality that we have to take into account as we're figuring out what to do. And I should say here, anybody has comments back to me, feedback, questions, feel free to post them at any time. I'm kind of popping back and forth between a couple windows, so I might not see them right away, but I can see your comments. And I would love to hear, what you think, if you have stuff to add to this, or if you think something I'm saying, is off point, off track, that's fine too. Let's talk. So again, the options that are available to us. So there is the provision in the Constitution where you could impeach a Supreme Court justice. This is under Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. In all cases, the House investigates and votes on articles of impeachment, and then any articles that receive a majority vote, so just a simple majority, are then passed along to the Senate. That body, the Senate, conducts a trial, and a supermajority of 2/3 is required to remove the officer. So, again, maybe not in January, depending on where things stand, but it would be possible. And it certainly does make sense, I think, again, in the interest of aggressively trying to undermine the authority of this court, which is critical, because if we care about human rights and continuing on this planet, then we need to pull out all the stops. And this court is now going to be a major tool that the ruling elite are going to be able to use to continue to assault the rest of us. And so there should be an impeachment investigation initiated as soon as we have a new Congress. And if they don't have the votes to pass that through the House and get it through the Senate, it should at least happen as an effort to undermine the court. I think that one of the biggest things working against us at this point is how much we as Americans give away our authority to the Supreme Court and sort of worship judicial review and the legal system, in particular judges at the Supreme Court level, and we need to back away from all of that. And that's been true, again, not just because Kavanaugh is in that seat, or Gorsuch, or the majority that is extremely right-wing, or anything. That has not served us well. That is what has brought us corporate personhood in the first place, going back, almost 200 years. And so the, really kind of almost worship of courts and the justices as if they are some neutral, non-political folks is a myth that we have been told and swallow. I mean, I remember learning it in history class in middle school. Thank goodness we have the Supreme Court where these folks can be objective and they can interpret and overturn democratic laws. No, most countries actually do not have judicial review the way that we do. We give way more power to our Supreme Court than just about any other country. We have less of them than most other countries. And we also have appointments for life. And all of that is sort of part of going all the way back to this country's founding, an effort to make sure that the elites stayed in charge and were not at risk of democracy undermining their unfair power. So we should take this opportunity to move past that once and for all. And so at Move to Amend, we actually see this as, terrible as it is, just like Citizens United was terrible, potentially it is an opportunity for us to kind of pull the veil away on something that we've needed to grapple with as a country for a really long time, and begin to take care of it now in this moment where people are looking around going, wait, what the heck, right? So impeachment should be on the table for Kavanaugh and maybe Clarence Thomas as well, right? And also, again, not just because of the sexual harassment of Anita Hill. Clarence Thomas has had repeated conflicts of interest with his wife, his connections with Monsanto. He's an illegitimate Supreme Court justice as well. And so, let's not stop with only the most recent issues. Let's tackle them all. So that's one thing. And then it has also, and we talked about this a little bit on our Facebook some weeks ago, and it's been a conversation. There's a really good article in The Intercept, which maybe Garrett, who's helping with running, responses and making sure I see stuff and posting, could add. It's by Mehdi Hassan. From September 30th, Pack the Supreme Court. So he talks about why that should be on the table as well in terms of a strategy of what to do. And I think he actually lays it out very well. So just so that we can get clear, the Constitution actually provides for the House of Representatives to decide how many members there are on the Supreme Court, and actually all it takes is a simple majority vote to change the number of Supreme Court justices. And there's a history in this country of that being something that happens generally is in these sort of extreme moments of political disagreement and maneuverings. But the reality is that he says, and I think that he makes it really well, it really isn't court packing, it's court balancing. The Republicans have already effectively figured out a way to pack the Supreme Court with that current 9 number by refusing to appoint Obama's Garland suggestion and by ramming through Kavanaugh, right? And so our response needs to be in kind. And we actually have a tool to do that. And in fact, there's no global norm of 9 Supreme Court justices. He lists that, Great Britain has 12, Israel has 15, India there's 25. So there's nothing magic about 9. There's no reason why that's right. I think the other issue that we're kind of up against in this country, even within each of ourselves, is this idea that because this is how the United States has been doing it, that's somehow the best way to do it, and that we actually have the best democracy in the world, which is totally fraudulent. And so, again, kind of stepping back and recognizing that, in fact, the way that we do things has ensured that we have a ruling elite that has more wealth than any other time in history, concentrated with fewer people, and in part our democracy has made that possible. And so there's probably some really fundamental flaws with our democracy, right? And so let's uncover them and then stop operating as if they are right. So some of the other stuff that he talks about is, kind of the reaction that might come about as a result of that there's sort of this idea of like, oh my gosh, if we do that, then they'll do that, and it'll just be the never-ending political fight. And, maybe to some degree, but honestly, in the past when it has been used as a tool, it sometimes is necessary to forward important ends, like when Lincoln added a justice to the court in order to, quote, further the federal war aims of preserving the Union and ending slavery. So, yeah, that was politically motivated, but it was important and a good thing to do. And we're kind of in the same boat. This hard right-wing court is wildly out of sync with U.S. popular opinion on on abortion, on same-sex marriage, on consumer rights, on environmental regulations, on gerrymandering, on campaign finance. He lists all of these things. And so while it may feel like an extreme reaction, like, isn't it extreme to allow this court that is out of touch with the political sentiment of this country and this democracy, the majority of where we stand, is not in favor of where they're going to be headed and what their agenda is. And so to just stand aside and say, oh, well, this is how it is, and too bad the Republicans sort of cheated and played unfair, but now we're stuck with this, and we all just have to watch our human rights, go down the drain, let alone actually addressing some of the problems that we need to. That is unconscionable. So we need to use every tool that we have. And so the other piece, potentially would be term limits in terms of a more systemic solution to the court problem. But that requires a constitutional amendment, which obviously we're in the business of talking about here at Move to Men, and we will talk about that more in a minute. But this is something that could actually be done relatively quickly. So that needs to be at the top of the agenda, and really, kind of going into 2020 and looking at, the fight for who's in Congress and then who's president should really include that conversation. So I would agree with this author who says that. And I won't go through all of his points, but, I think he makes a really good case for how that's necessary just to protect the status quo of some of the progresses we've made around healthcare and addressing, having abortion be legal, and also gay marriage, and we're seeing already, in just the first week that Kavanaugh's in there, that voter suppression is kind of top of their list. And so again, are we really going to just stand by and let them whittle away any ability to influence in the future? So we have to demand that Democrats who are in Congress really push for this. This needs to be on the table. This needs to be part of the agenda. And any Democrat that isn't willing to do whatever it takes, especially because this is entirely legal, it's entirely constitutional, whatever it takes in that department to protect the public, that's only Democrats who are willing to do that should be allowed to keep their office. And anybody who doesn't have that agenda, who gets squirrely or, nervous or says that that's, outside the bounds of what's imaginable, etc., then, sorry, they got to go. Desperate times call for desperate measures. So that's sort of like the defensive options that are available to us. So I'd love to hear what you think about those. And, if you agree with me and Intercept, there's also a good article that was in Vox about this as well. So maybe sharing those two. And Garrett, that would be awesome. Give people just some context. Actually, you know what? Oh, this time I actually can do it. So sorry. I will just go ahead and do it here because normally I can't see the comments. But like I said, Facebook changed something. So I'll just go ahead and post them so folks can actually find them right away. So these are the two articles about, oops, did that work? These are the two articles about stacking the court. Are there, oh, maybe, it's possible there's more comments here that I haven't been able to see because I just posted. Sorry, excuse me 1 second, guys. Let me just make sure this is working right because actually I thought I could see your comments. Oh, there it is. Okay, now it's working. So there's one. So maybe Garrett already posted it and I just missed it. And now I'm seeing that like Ken said some stuff here and some others. So let me scroll back and find your... Okay, cool. So there's definitely been more conversation than I realized. So thank you. And you know what? Boo. Give me 1 second. I just want to make sure I can see. Facebook just changes how they do this always. And so it's like every time I come on here, there's sort of new options. And so I'm going to put this on my phone too, so I can definitely see what you're saying. So let's see. Hey, Nina, nice to see you. That's exciting. All right. So Ken, I see that some folks are asking about your national referendum. Do you want to, in the comments, I mean, just to be clear, we don't have a national referendum at this time, so that would be a constitutional amendment that would be needed first. And so down the road, that might make a lot of sense. Let's see, Norm pointing out that, yeah, exactly. So part of what we need to do, and this is important because we're probably not going to have the votes that would be needed in the Senate, at least, and we'll see about the House, in order to actually impeach Kavanaugh. So what is important, though, is also to just undermine credibility, right? Because the other thing, too, is that the Supreme Court doesn't actually have the authority to enforce anything. So we need to keep that in mind. Unfortunately, they're supporting, like when we're talking about voter disenfranchisement and what happened with their latest ruling around Native Americans not being able to, or all of us, not being able to register our address at a P.O. box, but not actually acknowledging the fact that most Native people who live on reservations have P.O. boxes, and that is the way that they have addresses. And, any reasonable court would have found that, the priority should be on allowing people to vote and making that possible. And so ruled differently than they did rule. And so in those instances where they're helping a state to facilitate voter disenfranchisement, then, I don't know that we have that much ability to ignore the court. But, there was a long time in this country where women couldn't vote legally, and yet they would still do that, and, pushing those cases up to the court and basically just ignoring all of this whenever they do us wrong, I think is part of what we can do. So let's see, I'm just kind of scrolling this to make sure I'm not missing anything. So, right, so we need to think about our defensive options. We need to aggressively pursue them. We need to make sure that everybody in Congress understands that that is their mandate and their job. And we need to undermine the credibility of this court. And also want to point out that in terms of the stacking piece or the balancing of the Supreme Court, if you will, the last time that was attempted was Roosevelt, because the court was aggressively trying to rule the New Deal policies that Roosevelt was pushing as unconstitutional. And so Roosevelt threatened to get Congress to get the House to add a number of new Supreme Court justices. And ultimately that didn't work. However, what he was able to do, did I just go away? Hold on 1 sec. This doesn't look good. Motherfucker. I think Facebook just logged me out. No, okay, I can still see myself. I'm not totally sure what's up, but can you all still see me? You can still see me? Okay. On my Facebook, I got logged out, but on my phone, it looks like it's still here. I can see your comments on my phone, so sorry folks. I don't know. Facebook is just... Okay, apologies. So, didn't work, right? But what happened is one of the justices who was sort of more in the middle, which crazily is going to be Roberts, is going to be the moderate, actually switched his position and allowed a number of New Deal proposals to go ahead and didn't overturn them because he was scared of Roosevelt stacking the court. So that's the other piece too, is like we should this is where the Democrats just kill me, because it's like they are completely unwilling to actually act in any way like they think it's possible to win or be effective or succeed in the agenda. Is just sort of this like, oh, we tried, we did the best we could. I mean, honestly, I wanted to see Kamala Harris take that FBI report, which probably was just bogus bullshit, but still, we don't even know what it said. Grab it, she should have worn flats that day. Cory Booker should have blocked whoever the hell was guarding, and she should have just run out the door with it, and then they should have published it. Honestly, who would actually say that there was anything wrong with that, of showing the public what the FBI's barely anything investigation did? Why are they not actually acting like we are being held hostage by an extremely aggressive, anti-human life force that is willing to do whatever it takes to win? And so maybe we should keep that in mind. And a little bit, again, I don't think we need to act dirty, but we need to definitely recognize that, we are at war here. There is a war being waged against us. I don't have children in large part because I don't know that their survival would be at all a reasonable thing on this earth. That means we have a war being waged against us, right? So what are these people doing? These people who are saying that they're our leaders. And I do think that there are some people who are in Congress who actually are willing to take this position, right? So we should work with them, and they should push on their own party. And, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers, we need to get rid of them. We need to get rid of them. So anyway, that little rant aside, but we need to make them scared and recognize. And so, props to all the women who did, and some men who did civil disobedience. And that needs to obviously continue. Really what we need to do is build a movement, right? So these political strategies are important, and are part of the mix, but only a people's movement that is actually pushing these leaders to lead is going to be effective. So we need to demand that they push for impeachment, even if we don't have the votes yet. He's appointed for life, so he can be impeached anytime. So if it takes a while, fine. But that should happen over and over again. Impeachment, we should look at the stacking of the court, and those are our defensive mechanisms. Then, though, again, kind of in the spirit of, thanks, Ken. I'm glad it's okay with you guys. I am so angry about this. Right? So angry. In the spirit, though, of how do we take this opportunity to actually maybe move farther than what seems possible right now in this moment of a major loss. But that's what Move to Amend is always all about, right? Is, real democracy in this country, something we've never had, something that actually, is still on the agenda because it didn't start in the beginning, and there have been forces that have tried to push for it, but there's been a tremendous backlash along the way, and right now we are seriously losing, right? But most people agree with us on the fact that, we want universal health care. We want abortion to be safe and legal. We want to protect the environment. We do not want to get exterminated as a result of climate change, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to go through the whole list. And so how can we take this opportunity to take a lot of these decisions out of the hands of the Supreme Court? We give way too much power to these 9 justices or everybody underneath them who sits, who are judges. Honestly, who are these people that they have so much power and authority, and we just kind of hand it over to them and allow them to say, oh yeah, that's fine. We can just, remove the ability for almost all Native Americans to vote in North Dakota. What? No. So the way to do that would be to actually take a look at our Constitution and recognize that it is a woefully inadequate human rights document. Shitty ass human rights document. I'm sorry, but if you look at the rest of the rest of the world and examples of countries that have had democratic revolutions to overthrow, colonialism And a lot of them are not faring very well, in large part because of our country's foreign policy decisions and the money that we use to, murder democratically elected leaders and or undermine them in all kinds of ways, or militarily invade and all of that, right? But nonetheless, there are amazing examples of human rights documents that people have put in place in their constitutions. The United Nations Declaration on Human Rights and all the principles that are in there. We don't need to even come up with this from scratch. I mean, certainly we can put our own American stamp on it, right? But did something bad happen, Shelley?
What?
I feel like something bad happened out there with the cat.
A lot of stuff going on.
A lot of stuff. Okay, great. My cat did a very bad thing that I can smell. All right. Any chance you can shut the door? And I am very sorry if you want to just leave and not deal with it and let me deal with it. Oh, okay. He's sick right now, so all right. Anyway, I'm just gonna persevere. All right. Anyways, so for example, other countries have made amazing strides to recognizing that the environment should have a right to exist, to flourish, and that there should be rights of nature. And in some cases it's at a particular level. So, New Zealand has given rights to rivers and ecosystems. In the case of Ecuador and some other countries that have followed Ecuador's lead, we're talking, rights of nature across the board. So if we actually want to address climate change, and this is just one example, why do we not have a constitutional protection? Why are we who are working in the environmental movement putting all of our energy into state policies or federal policies that are at the whim of a court to interpret whether they're constitutional, if we can even get them passed? Now, I'm not saying that we are going to have a Congress where tomorrow we'll be able to just amend the Constitution like that. But on the issues where the majority of Americans actually agree, so again, a right to healthcare, a fundamental human right for everyone to have healthcare, could be something that our Constitution could say. And those who are pushing for Medicare for all are not even talking about how to put that in the Constitution. And I know that that's partly because it feels too big, but honestly, is it in comparison? I mean, we haven't made any progress on it the other way. And we are in a revolutionary moment. We need to push ourselves into a revolutionary moment. And so looking at how to, in a systemic, long-term way, take a lot of this out of the hands of the court. Perhaps in the long run, we can actually look back on this. Should be our goal, that we can make it so that in the long run, we can look back and say, it was terrible, but in the end, it was a good thing that Citizens United happened, because it opened a lot of people's eyes up to something that has been going on for over 100 years, and yet people had missed it. Or maybe in the end, we can say it is a good thing that Kavanaugh actually got on the court, because that forced ourselves to look in the mirror and to recognize that we've been putting way too much authority and the power of in the hands of 9 people who have vastly predominantly been, white men who don't have the best interests of the majority of us at heart. They don't even understand or relate to the majority of us. I mean, these people who went to Yale and Harvard, all of them, they don't understand what it's like to be a regular person. And so how do we take this opportunity so that, maybe it's 10 years from now, I hope it could be faster. It feels like we have the potential in terms of how untenable things are, that we could have, something happen more quickly, maybe the way that, the fall of the Berlin Wall or something like that. Although we also are at risk of, just sort of tumbling into an overt fascist dictatorship too. So there's that. But how do we make sure that in the long run we can say not just that we, kind of beat back this attack on our rights, but that we can actually feel as though, we used it as an opportunity to pull the veil away and recognize that this country has not been operating the way that we've been told that it does. It has not been serving the majority of people. It has not been serving people of color every step of the way. Any rights and protections that people of color have has been because they have demanded those rights, fought and died for those rights. It's not because this country actually has some sort of coded DNA, innate tendency towards democracy or justice. To the contrary. And we can be so much better. So that's, the way that we're thinking about it and talking about it. Obviously, people might come back at us with oh, that seems hard. But, what do we have to lose at this point? Like I said, I don't have kids in large part because it feels like it's an inhospitable place to bring new life into the world. And I am not the only person of my generation who feels that way. There are a lot of us, and that's because we see that this is a very dangerous place to try to survive. And so we need to do better. And it's really up to us to make it possible for the rest of the world to continue to exist too, because the domination of this country everywhere else makes it so that this is not really just our problem to solve for ourselves, which is certainly is part of it, but actually we have a responsibility to the rest of the planet too, because the United States is the #1 oppressive force in the world. So that's my take on it. And also, again, I'm speaking for Move to Amend, maybe without the swear words, maybe, but this is how we're looking at this. See you, Shelley. Have a good night. Thank you very much. I apologize. So what do you guys think? What do you all think? I can see that there have been some comments. I'm going to make sure to catch them. I'm glad that, Ken, you are weighing in and letting people know. Definitely agree it's time for big changes. We do need to all get out and vote. We need to all get out and vote, even if it feels like we don't. Oh, one thing that I have been seeing is that it seems like, I live in California and am lucky to not really be in a state where there is as much voter disenfranchisement as there is in a number of other states. But nonetheless, if you go to vote and they tell you that you've been purged from the rolls, which is happening in a number of states and the court has said is perfectly fine, make sure you ask for a provisional ballot. Make sure you cast that. There probably will be a number of lawsuits following the election to try and help with that. But again, who's that going to go to? So voting is important, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to keep us from doing it. But if that's all we think that the circumstances call for, we are going to be fucked. So let's make sure that that is not all we do. We really need to build a movement. So let's get to it. Move to Amend is working on doing that. Thank you, Megan. Yeah, vote as though your life depends on it. And then also recognize that that vote is only just a tiny little step that you could take. And there's a whole lot that your life depends on as well. So if you're not already actively part of Move to Amend, invite you to join us. This issue of money in politics, but also corporate power and corporations using the Constitution against us when we try to assert our democratic authority is an issue that, from our perspective, the reason why we're working on it is because it feels like the most fundamental thing. Climate change also, but I don't know how we actually address climate change without getting corporations out of our government, right? So that's why I'm working on this issue, because nobody has brought me something and made a case that is more strategic. So if you agree that this issue is fundamental, then I invite you to get involved with us. The approach that we take is definitely not, let's just get the right people in Congress and make it happen. It's movement building, working with other movements that are working on issues of social justice that have a connection to corporate power, which, hint, that's like everything, and building our power and our capacity as a resistance movement. That is the only thing that has ever brought about change like a constitutional amendment before. And I think at this point, and just to be clear, Move to Amend has been clear about this all along, we need to do more than just amend the Constitution in this way. We need a right to vote, a constitutional right to vote. I mean, if nothing else, right, let's work on that one. If we've got everybody telling us, oh, you got to get out and vote, get out and vote. We don't even have a constitutional right to vote, and which is why the Supreme Court can interpret all of these efforts on the part of states to disenfranchise people and keep them from voting as perfectly fine within the Constitution. If we had a constitutional right to vote and a guarantee that that vote was counted and that there was a paper trail, we would be in so much better shape. And so everybody who is involved in politics should be saying, that's what we want. You know, okay, yeah, we're going to work on Beto O'Rourke's campaign or whatever, but we're also going to work for a constitutional right to vote. And Move to Amend would be happy to join that fight too. In fact, our original call before we had our amendment written included a right to vote, addressing corporate constitutional rights, the ability to ban money from elections, and also the authority for local government and state government to stand up against preemption efforts, which is what corporations do when local communities try to pass, say, like a minimum wage law to make minimum wage higher because our federal minimum wage still leaves you in poverty and isn't enough to pay rent in most states in this country. And so, you know, a local community will pass a minimum wage law to raise it, and then a couple communities start doing that in the state, and then in response, normally it's not even a particular corporation, it'll be an industry, nonprofit, kind of conglomerate that's supported by a number of corporations, will go and lobby state legislatures and say, will you pass a law that bans local communities from changing the law in this way? And 9 times out of 10, state legislatures do that because, newsflash, we don't need to just get a new Congress. We also need new state legislatures in almost every state, including California. And then that's off the table. And so those were the initial kind of actually 4 demands that we had as part of Move to Amend. And then there was so much traction around the money in politics and corporate personhood piece. And also we were so worried that a lot of the campaign finance nonprofits based in Washington, D.C., were going to try and turn it into just an argument to address campaign finance and not the bigger underlying problem of corporate constitutional rights, that we decided, okay, we really need to zero in on that and write an amendment that does those 2 things, because those 2 things are deeply connected. And so that was where we started from. So we'd be happy to pick up a right to vote again. And I really hope that if you work on homeless issues, if you work on healthcare issues, if you work on environmental issues, if you work on other poverty issues, if you work on trying to raise the minimum wage to $15, which really it should be more than that. If, we could go through the list. The question is, what are your organizations doing to make sure that your real demand in the long run is to codify those protections in the Constitution? Because otherwise we just have to keep on fighting the same fight. I mean, not to disparage in any way, shape, or form the civil rights movement, but unfortunately that movement was not able to achieve, and it wasn't really part of the agenda to try and change the Constitution, for example, to ensure a right to vote or to address segregation on that level. And so we see that the Supreme Court was able to gut the Voting Rights Act, whatever it was, 5 years ago now. And that sort of led the way, or paved the way, for the situation we're in now, where they continue to dismantle voter protections. If there had been a constitutional right to vote at that point, then it would be a whole different ballgame. So how are we thinking as big as possible in our demands? Because only by demanding them are they ever going to happen, right? We can say, oh, that's hard, that's so far away, blah, blah, blah. Well, if we don't demand it, then it's definitely never going to happen. And if we are censoring ourselves from the beginning and saying, oh, we don't think that's possible, well then, yeah, 100% that is not possible. But we should not be the ones who are starting off saying what's possible. We need to demand everything that's needed and then, push for it. And maybe there will be some compromises along the way. But we certainly shouldn't compromise ourselves, especially when we know that universal healthcare is the solution to the problem. And really, until that is a constitutional fundamental right, then we have the potential for, even if we get it passed, for that to be interpreted as unconstitutional by this hostile Supreme Court. We have the potential for Congress to change their mind later if there's a new president or, a new majority. And so we can't leave it up to them. They've proven that. They've proven that. All right, so anyone else? What do you all think? Let's see. I've been on conservative sites. I want to see what Robin said here. On conservative sites since the Kavanaugh hearings, and I think the language used needs to be addressed. We are people, not negative names. Say more about that, Robin. I'm not quite sure what you mean. But I do think that the way that we talk about things on the left can improve and make it more possible for us to have a larger umbrella. That doesn't mean that we stop talking about race, to be clear, and racism. That doesn't mean that we stop talking about gender and sexism, right? But we do need to be talking about class more. We do need to be talking about how there's a class war, and we also need to be clear that if folks are not as far along in their sort of consciousness raising around how racist and sexist this country is and always has been, that there's still room to bring them into maybe not, our deepest strategy conversations, but into our work and make the space for them to, get their eyes opened to what the situation is. Any possibility of annulling this presidency and his court appointments, so impeaching Trump? I mean, that's been on the table since he was installed, because he didn't win the popular vote, and because at this point there's ample evidence that he's not necessarily even working on our behalf at all. I don't really, like to get into the extreme Red Scare, Russia freak out stuff, but obviously something is going on there, right? So I would recommend Move to Amend isn't working on impeachment. Again, that just doesn't feel systemic enough to us. That's a defense mechanism. But Free Speech for People is a group that is working on impeachment, and you might want to check that out. I think that they are planning, with the new Congress, to start again and try again. I mean, the thing is, at this point, unless Democrats come up with somebody more viable than anybody that's out there right now, we also need to be prepared for Trump to be president again in 2020. We need to figure out how to not have that be the case, but it doesn't look good at the moment. And this kind of anemic leadership on the part of the Democratic Party is our biggest hurdle to being able to get Trump out. So if you are holding your nose and voting for some Democrat that is mediocre at best in November, okay. I can understand that at this point, especially if there's no other alternative. But let's make sure that shitty Democrat is not the best candidate in 2020 on the ballot, that somebody better is there. And also let's make sure to hold their feet to the fire in these next 2 years and make it untenable for them to be as woefully inadequate and anemic as most of them really seem to enjoy being. All right. Oh, I did just want to acknowledge, Ken, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you on your email. You may have seen, I threw out my back because my dog is also sick in addition to my cat. That's what happens when you have geriatric animals all at the same time. And so I saw it, and I will reply to you, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. I just didn't have a chance to do that yet. So to come. Let's see, Robert, I just want to see here what you said. We have workers' rights. They're supposed to be here. I'm not quite taking this all in on the fly. So if anybody wants to respond to Robert, go for it. Also, it seems like maybe that's in relation to like a conversation that was happening earlier. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody else. Okay, Robin says we're being called names instead of having conversation. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of that on both sides, but the extreme right is doing a really good job of using social media to kind of bait the left, and also to obscure reality and confuse people with just straight up wrong information. So knowing that that's true, I think we need to recognize that social media is sort of a minefield. I mean, it is a place where we can have this conversation, for example, and we'll continue to use it. Although Facebook continues to make it harder and harder for us to get our posts out there. So that's the other thing, is these are all corporate controlled channels, that corporations of that extremely wealthy class that are not interested in democracy or human rights or protection of workers or anything like that. So yes, we should use these platforms, but recognize that there's limitations there. And at any point, if we put too much into that, they can pull the plug on us in all kinds of ways, just like that. And with net neutrality now probably very hard to achieve, something else that we could enshrine in the Constitution if we really, that we need to, because the internet at this point is, it's having free and open internet is as important as our freedom of the press. And so I wonder if we shouldn't be also kind of making the argument that the First Amendment should already protect net neutrality. Obviously, the folks who wrote the Constitution didn't know anything about the internet, but the press served the purpose that our internet serves now, in addition to the press. And so I think there's a case to be made that the First Amendment, while it should be adjusted for current times and or added to, also should protect net neutrality as is. But anyway, so these platforms are problematic, and so we also need to just get out there and talk to people. And that's part of, again, why Move to Amend is structured around local chapters. We call them affiliates, and they operate in communities. If you don't have a local affiliate near you, I would encourage you to think about starting one up. Maybe, Garrett, you can just share the link for volunteering with Move to Amend, because I do see some names here that I don't recognize, which means that you're maybe not as active as you might be. And we would love to have you get involved more and to work with us. And so, having those conversations face to face, we have a project called We the People Listen, which is actually a door knocking campaign to have a listening, a conversation that starts with a survey where we just listen to what folks think are the most important issues and how they talk about things. And, it takes more time, but at the end of the day, that's more powerful than, going into like a right-wing, or no matter what, just any kind of, Facebook group and starting conversations with strangers who may not even be who they say they are, right? There's a lot of that going on. So thinking about all that as part of our strategy as well is important. I also just want to, one more thing, seems like folks are, don't have a lot more to add. I've said my piece, and so I don't have much more either. So we can sign off soon, but I want to make sure everybody knows about Pledge to Amend, which is our campaign to get candidates to pledge to support the amendment if they're running for office. So as you're going to vote in a couple weeks, or some people are already voting now, make sure you check out our Pledge to Amend page so that you can see which candidates have taken the pledge, and only support candidates who do. Because at the end of the day, that's also how we assert our power, is by, forcing folks to recognize that if they aren't willing to fight for our agenda, then we are definitely not willing to support them. So thank you, everybody. Like I said, this is just the first place. We will obviously be talking about this more, if nothing else, after the election, because that somewhat changes what's on the table, what's possible. Basically, what we'll figure out is whether we have enough of a critical mass to think of Congress as the one branch of government where we might have some ability to have influence. We certainly have no influence over the other two. Or whether we have an entirely hostile federal government. Either way, though, we've got to figure out how to get out of this, right? There's going home, crying, and being done with it is just not an option. So we got to figure this out, and let's try to make it so that we have some ability to work with some of the people who are in Congress to advocate for human rights and democracy and justice. And with whatever we've got, Move to Amend will be here the day after the election and on until we win. So I hope you will stick with us until that point and help us make it happen as soon as possible. And the last thing I'll say is one of the most important ways you can do that is to be a monthly donor to Move to Amend. We need your support. We do not have millions of dollars. We get all this done on a small fraction of almost every other national nonprofit, certainly that has our kind of scope. We are making do on way less, and we will happily continue to do that because we can, but everybody who pitches in helps make it a little bit less of a stretch. So I donate $28 a month for the 28th Amendment. I invite you to join me in contributing that. Garrett, it'd be awesome if you could post the link to how people can donate monthly, but we are happy to accept whatever you can afford, $3, $5. Some people give $100. Some people give even more than that. Not very many, but if you can, please give whatever you can. So thanks for joining. We'll put the recording of this up on YouTube and see where it takes us, and look forward to the next time we have a conversation. If you are listening to the recording and you want to weigh in on the comments, we will respond in time. So definitely feel free to engage and add to the discussion at any point. I should have said that earlier, but I forgot. All right, everyone, good night. And don't forget to vote and do much more than that. Take care.